Hope everybody can see me. Welcome back to Parenting Against the Grain. This is our Facebook group that talks all about raising kids with. Okay, let's hope it's working. This is Parenting Against the Grain. In this group, we talk all about raising kids with intention and raising kids with empathy and kindness and positive parenting. So if you are new to the group, welcome. I am Amy Webb. I am the moderator, administrator of this group. If you are new, I do try to go live every couple weeks. It's supposed to be every week, but it's 2020 and things don't go as planned. As many of you probably know, my kids are all online schooling like many of you guys are, so going live has its challenges when you're tend to be interrupted about every 20 minutes. But I go live when I can to talk about parenting challenges that people are experiencing. So yesterday I put a poll in the group about what topic was of interest to people for me to discuss today, and the topic that was most popular was helping kids deal with big emotions. And I'm not really surprised at that. That is a common question that most parents have, including myself. So I have delved into this quite a bit and tried to find research and tips that can help all of us. Because dealing with our kids' big emotions, I think, is something that, especially since we're all at home and online schooling, and there's a lot of big emotions. Let's just say that. And my kids are 7 and 11, and I think we often think that once we're past the toddler years that our kids are mature enough to handle emotions and that kind of goes away, dealing with big emotions, but that's not always true. I think it's a very slow maturity process when it comes to emotional development. And so even as our kids are tweens and teens, those of you, if anybody has teens, you could probably speak to this, that there are a lot of big emotions even when kids are older. And really, it's a lifelong process, right? I mean, most of us as adults deal with our emotions a little bit better, but we all have our moments, right? When those big emotions just overwhelm us. And so, learning skills at an early age for how to cope with that, I think, is one of the biggest jobs we have as parents, is to help our kids learn those skills at an early age so that they can cope with those big emotions as they mature and deal with different situations throughout life. And so it's really a life skill, and it takes a long time to develop it. Um, so I wanted to start out. I saw an episode of a show last night on Netflix that I felt like kind of relates to this topic a little bit. I don't know if any of you guys are fans of The Crown. Um, I'm behind on my seasons. I got behind, and so uh, I will try not to spoil anything if you are behind too, but I'm not on the current season. Um, so in The Crown last night I was watching, and there's an episode where uh, the Queen is dealing with a really horrible tragedy that happened in a village in her kingdom, I guess you call it, in Wales. There's this horrible tragedy that happens, and so she is faced with the choice of how to handle this tragedy and whether she should go visit the village where this horrible thing had happened. So I'm not going to go into all the details, but let's just, the short version is she goes to visit this village where this tragedy had happened, and basically she feels horrible for this tragedy that had happened and for the people who experienced it, but she couldn't really express emotion about it. She had kind of just sort of even though I think she felt horrible about it, she couldn't cry. She couldn't, even though her handlers, her staff, was kind of saying, like, in Wales, when you go to visit these people, it would, it's okay to show emotion. Like, you don't have to be stoic, right? They were kind of telling her, not like telling her she had to cry, but basically saying, like, it's okay to show emotion. And she really couldn't. Even though I think she was deeply distraught by it, she couldn't cry. She couldn't really express that emotion. And in her meeting with the prime minister, she kind of talks to him about this and says, all throughout my life, I feel like I haven't been able to express, emotion very well, or even especially sadness. She said when her grandmother died, even though she loved her dearly, she didn't cry. And when she had her first child, it's a very emotional experience. She didn't cry. And so she's saying, like, basically saying, like, I feel like there's something wrong with me or deficient. And so this whole thing kind of develops in the episode. But basically, what the point that I wanted to bring up about this was that, she lived in an era, kind of our grandparents' generation now, where showing emotion was not really accepted. And now we don't know enough about her personality to know whether the reason she has trouble expressing emotion is because of the way she was raised, or was it because of that era in history when people, children were taught to sort of be seen and not heard, right? Or is it something about her temperament that is just her personality? We don't know. But I think the point I want to make with this is we want to help our kids learn how to deal with emotions, express emotions, and not stuff down their emotions, right? So that they can go through life and feel like a complete person and feel like they have a handle on their emotional life, right? We don't want to raise kids as in past generations where it was sort of like just stuff everything down and hope it doesn't come out in some ugly way later on, right? That's what past generations have taught their kids, right? That boys shouldn't cry, and you can't have these big emotional outbursts, and women who express emotions were called hysterical, and that's not the things that we want to foster in our kids, because we have learned over not just child development, but just in the course of history, we have learned that stuffing down those emotions is not healthy, and they tend to come out in unhealthy ways later. And that could be through, addiction or abuse or anxiety, depression. And so, not to say that all those mental health issues are not always the source because people can't express emotions. It's not that, but that has been in the past some things that have happened when people cannot express emotions in a healthy way. So, all that to say is, I think in our generation of parents, we are trying to do things in a new way. We're trying to foster an emotional health in our kids so that they can express those emotions in healthy ways. And that's what the things that I'm going to talk about here are all focused on is, fostering a healthy emotional life for our kids. So, with that in mind, I wanted to start off with this great model that I have seen several different ways presented that helps explain how emotions work in our brain. I think the person who originally came up with this is Dr. Dan Siegel, who is one of my favorite child psychologists. And I will post the video where he explains this. He can explain it better than I can. But the whole idea is, emotions develop in the brain, and there's different ways, and it just kind of explains how emotions work in the brain and what we can do to help control our emotions and manage our emotions. So the hand model starts, with our hand, and so the thumb inside here is the kind of inner part of our brain, and this part, the wrist, is sort of representing the spinal column, right? So all the little uh, electronic signals are coming through our spinal cord right to our brain. This is like the lizard brain, right? The most basic brain part of our brain. And our amygdala is in there, which has a lot to do with controlling emotion. So this is like this kind of most basic part of our brain, right? And this is, what gets activated when we experience like fear and anxiety and things like that. Over the top, the fingers represent the rest of the brain that is controls higher order thinking, right? Especially this front, the prefrontal cortex, is where all the higher level thinking happens. And this part is what kind of helps manage this part, right? So when you are experiencing some big emotion, your prefrontal cortex comes in and tries to regulate that so you don't lose control, right? It's this higher order thinking. Well, so think about how this works. In kids, this prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. Okay? In adults it is, but kids not so much. They're still working on this part. So they have less ability to control these big emotions that are coming from in here, like the amygdala, fear, anxiety, fight or flight, all that. And they have less ability up here to kind of manage that. So the way he explains it, and different psychologists have explained this, when we do, or when kids lose control of the prefrontal cortex, right, that regulates all that emotion, you flip your lid, right, and that is when this big emotion comes out, sometimes in not so pleasant forms. It can be, screaming, yelling, hitting, punching, fighting, whatever it might come out as. But that's basically when the prefrontal cortex has kind of lost regulation over this more primal part of the brain, and you flip your lid. So that is helpful if your kids are old enough to understand that model. That might be something helpful to even explain to them. 5, 6, 7-year-olds could probably understand that. It's also helpful, of course, for us because it helps us understand when we flip our lid with our kids or in other situations what's going on. When you get so angry or so upset or so fearful that you like see red, it's literally your brain sort of a little bit going offline. That prefrontal part is going offline. And so we have to understand and teach ourselves and teach our kids how to bring that prefrontal cortex back online so that we can control those emotions again. And that takes a lot of practice and time for the brain to mature enough to be able to do that. So that's our goal, really, as parents, right? What can we do to teach our kids and help them understand how to handle themselves and handle those big emotions when they start to get out of control? So, a few tips that I wanted to bring up with that. The first one is not punishing emotions. And so, this, I think, again, goes back to sort of the old school way of parenting a generation or two ago was if your kid is throwing a fit, losing control of their emotions, you just smack it down and you say, go to your room. This is the old school way, right? They might get a spanking, they might get a punishment. You can't throw a fit. That's it. You're done. Okay? But that doesn't really teach anything, right? It doesn't teach any skills for how to deal with those emotions. It just shuts them down and says, we shouldn't have these emotions. You need to just shut them off. So now, with positive parenting and this greater understanding of child development, we know that we have to take more of a skill building approach, whereas you don't punish the emotions. That's not very helpful. But we can instead set boundaries on behavior, but the emotions are allowed to be expressed, right? So the difference is, if your child's throwing a fit because their sibling took their toy, and they, hit their sibling, the first reaction might be just to punish them, right? We don't hit, go to your room, you're in timeout, whatever. But really, what the more positive parenting approach would be to try to teach them skills to handle that in a different way that doesn't involve hitting, right? It's okay to be upset because your sibling took your toy. That emotion is okay. Anybody would be upset when your sibling took your toy, right? But we don't hit. And so we give them other tools, come to me for help, or ask your sister not to take your toy, or, we can teach them other things to do so that the hitting part, we're setting boundaries on the behavior. The hitting is not okay, but the emotion, feeling upset, feeling angry is okay, but we have to learn how to manage it in a better way. So that's one of the really the best things I think I've learned in the last probably 5 years regarding positive parenting is this distinction between punishing emotions and setting boundaries on behavior. And that is a really helpful way to think about it. And I think the reason this is so hard for us as parents is because when our kids are losing control of their emotions, whether it be a tantrum or hitting or whatever, we just want it to stop, right? I think this is why it's so hard because as parents, we're so physiologically aroused by our kids crying or meltdown or whatever that we just want it to end, and we do anything just to make it end. And so I think that's where that immediate reaction comes from. It's like, just make it stop, just go to your room, just end it. But if we can again put our higher level thinking into play for a minute too, then we can say, okay, step back for a minute. This could be a real teaching moment, and I can help my child learn some skills here instead of, you know, just trying to get this tantrum over as quick as possible. I can help really build some skills for them and foster some skills in them that will, over time, and it takes a long time, help them be able to deal with those emotions better in the future so that the next time or the next time, maybe it's not a full on tantrum when this thing happens, but maybe they have a little bit different reaction because they have learned some skills. Um, the second point I wanted to talk about was understanding our own reactions and triggers. And this again goes back to this hand model, right? If we can have a little bit of personal insight into figuring out, okay, what triggers me as a parent to lose control of my emotions? Like, what situations or what encounters with my child continually or consistently cause me to kind of lose it with them, right? And so that could be, this requires a little bit of, you know, self-reflection, of course. Um, but I think if we can think about that, is it, you know, what triggers your reaction or your emotion? Is it certain situations? Is it when your kid does a certain thing? If we can think through those things, then we can hopefully help prevent some of those things. So if we know we're going to, you know, some big event where it's likely that our child might have a tantrum, in this situation, whatever it is, the grocery store, whatever, always causes problems for me, right? Then I can go into that situation knowing, okay, this sometimes causes problems. What can I do in advance to help kind of prepare myself or my child for this situation, whatever that might be? Do they need some coping strategies to handle this situation? Say, if you're going to a doctor's appointment and you know they're going to have to wait for a while, do we need to bring things to do for them to do so that they're less likely to have a meltdown? Do we need to bring snacks so they have something, you know, so they're not hungry while they're waiting for this appointment? Whatever it might be. Anything you can do to prepare for the situation. Sometimes it's not possible, right? We get triggered by anything that could happen in the course of daily life, right? The milk being spilled at the breakfast table or whatever. But anything we can do to say, okay, I know this situation sometimes doesn't go well for me and for my child. Can we prepare in some way? And that can often help kind of avoid those triggers and difficult situations. The next thing I wanted to talk about was kind of this idea of how do we react when our kid's having a meltdown? How much do we need to intervene, basically? So this is, I think, I have noticed in the last few years, even with older kids, this is sometimes a question I have as they're melting down or having some big emotional reaction. It's always like, well, how much do I need to intervene here? Can they calm themselves down? Do they just need to go to their room and figure it out on their own? Or do I need to somehow intervene and help them calm down, right? So I think this is something that Dr. Siegel and his co-author, Dr. Tina Bryson, talk about a lot in their books. And this is one of my favorite books of theirs that talk about these issues, The Yes Brain. If you haven't read it, it's awesome. How much do we intervene in these situations, right? So the things they talk about are kids really comes down to kids need the 5 S's, which are secure, feeling secure, seen, soothed, and safe. So if they're in an emotional outburst, emotional breakdown, and they aren't, you don't feel like they're feeling these 5 things, then I think that's the point when, as parents, we need to step in. So, you know, if your child's having an emotional outburst, and especially if they're very young, if they're a toddler, they usually need a lot more help, right? Because they're very young, they're very emotionally immature, so they may need a lot of help soothing. You may have to hold them or comfort them in some way, or, you know, whatever it might be. So that's the soothing part, right? But there is also kind of a line where at a certain point they need to learn to be able to handle certain things on their own. So it's like a fine line. You have to kind of judge your child's maturity. Um, you know, if you feel like they're getting so emotionally riled up that they just cannot calm down, then you know you have to step in and do something to help calm them down. But if you feel like this is something they can handle on their own, they just need a little time or a little quiet to be able to calm themselves down, then you know it's okay to let the emotion play out, I guess is what I'm saying. Like if they just need to vent and get that crying out and let it, let it out and then they're okay, that sometimes happens. But if they're very small, then sometimes you have to step in and offer, more support and soothing. But the other thing is too, as kids get older, we do have to allow a little bit of space for them to try to fix some things on their own, right? And so like if your 7 or 8 year old is throwing a fit because their shoe has a hole in it and they want new shoes right that second, you know, okay, we're not going to run out to the store that minute that they're having the fit and go buy a new pair of shoes to fix their situation, right? So you have to judge as a parent what is like a tolerable amount of frustration for my child at their age to handle and what is something that I need to really step in and help them deal with. So that's a tricky line sometimes, but the good thing to realize is that as they mature and you give them little opportunities to deal with these frustrations and difficulties on their own, then of course they learn more skills how to do that. And so we can't always step in and solve every problem, but we have to know when is this problem kind of over their head and I need to step in and help. And that is usually just a judgment call and based on their own emotional maturity, their age, and so forth. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was some kind of tangible things that we can do. When our kids are in this emotional outburst or tantrum, we can try to teach them skills. Now, teaching the skills in the midst of the outburst may not be may not be the most effective approach, but when they're in a calmer state, maybe try to work through what are some things that you can do when you're really upset. And these come back to all the kind of classic physical strategies that we can do to with kids. So it's, whether it be breathing, I know at our kids' school they teach a lot of different breathing techniques as a form of emotional regulation. So there's different. They have them picture like a balloon on their chest and make the balloon go up when you're breathing, or put your hands, a certain way, across your heart. Those things when you're breathing to help them calm down. So those are things that we can teach our kids. Whatever it takes some time to figure out what works for your kid. So some people like to have a time in corner or a calming corner where it has like maybe sensory items, like you could have Play-Doh or slime, or some people like the bubble wrap to pop that helps them calm down. Some kids do really well with like really physical things, jumping on a trampoline, or punching a pillow, or going outside and doing jumping jacks, or whatever helps expend that kind of emotional energy that will then bring them back down to a calmer state. So it takes some time to figure out what works for your child, but offering some ideas, because they, as kids, they don't have those ideas inherently. They don't really know what's going to help them calm down. So trying to encourage them to try different things can be helpful, and then they can, work through like what's going to work the best for them, what really helps them calm down. And one thing I will say that we have learned in all these months of being at home and homeschooling and or online learning and all that is physical exercise for kids is huge. I will just say that, and I mean I know it seems so obvious for most people, but the days when we can get outside and play really hard, kids need to play hard. I mean, physical activity for an hour or more. The the way that that helps them regulate emotions throughout the rest of the day before, especially after that, it's a huge difference. So I will just put my little soapbox moment in there about exercise, because it really, it's a huge game changer. I mean, anything we can do to get our kids off the screen, outside, and it is so hard right now. I know we work on this every day in my house, getting, especially in the winter, it's very hard. Anything we can do to get kids active, it makes a huge difference in their ability to regulate their emotions and their moods, and just everything works better when they get enough exercise. So that's my little 2 cents worth of promo for exercise. anyway, the whole point is that, the body and the mind work together. So these calming skills that we can help foster and teach our kids will help them for hopefully for the rest of their lives. That's why I exercise every day, right? Or almost every day. That's why grown-ups like to do yoga and exercise and meditate, is because all those things really work for regulating our emotions. Um, so anything that we can do to help our kids learn those skills early in life is going to be huge for them. It's going to make everything work better for them in terms of their emotional life. And just, an end note, if anybody has questions or comments later, I can chime in if you're watching later, and feel free to put those in the comments and I will respond to those. I will say that these emotional skills take a long time to learn. I mean, I think it's very challenging as parents that we want our kids to just be mature, right? And not have to deal with all these big emotions, but it takes years and years of practice and time to allow their brain to mature to the point where they can handle these big emotions. So give yourself some grace, give your child some grace and patience, that these things take time and they will develop, and one day they won't throw tantrums anymore. The day does come. But in the meantime, have some patience, and don't be too hard on yourself, because your kids will learn these skills. It just takes time. I hope that was helpful. If anybody has comments or questions, you can leave those in the box and I will return to this. And I hope you have a good day. Everybody take care.